What if I told you that the first tree you can see in Dark Souls 2 is this one? Yep, you're seeing it correctly. It's floating, like way above the ground. Then there's another tree right behind it, and that one does go through the ground, but you can see underneath the ground, so it also looks quite messy. Now, games often put assets in weird spots, and it's usually fine when direct line of sight is obstructed by other obstacles, except here, it really isn't. My guess is that they just didn't expect players to check out this area that much, but in case you didn't get the hint already, that's exactly what we're gonna do in this video. And we won't just check out the weird trees of Dark Souls 2, but we'll also try and understand why they were placed the way they were, inspect the lore related to them, or whip them repeatedly for them to moan and repair our equipment. Let's go back to things betwixt for a second. On the opposite side of our floating trees are a few normal trees we can inspect, and we can already notice a few differences from what we studied in Dark Souls 1. These trees have a 3D modeled trunk, with a bunch of branches and leaves rotated in different ways to make them look fuller. They're still immobile, with no wind rustling the leaves, but we've definitely moved a step forward compared to the previous game. A little bit further are several broken trees in what appears to be a small dilapidated forest. I think these were placed here to hint at the presence of the Cyclops. So yeah, in case you don't notice the huge footprints in the dirt, surely the broken trees will make you understand there's a threat in there, right? And then right here, you have Shrek's house. In this house reside a few old ladies. We do have two things to do here before we proceed forward. One, check upstairs to steal any loot these women might be stashing away. And two, we need to catch up on some lore to understand things betwixt and the trees that reside within. From the opening cinematic, we can gather that the player character is becoming hollowed, and thus slowly losing all of its memories. He sets out on a quest to cure this hollowing and is guided to the kingdom of Drangleic. Funnily enough, a magical tree seems to be the key to open the portal to Drangleic. I never really gave a second thought to this tree before, but if I skipped over it, then I wouldn't be able to say we looked at every tree in Dark Souls 2. So I started my research. It led me to an absolute gem of a website called Loki Souls. Now, we all know that the lore of Souls games is very convoluted, and conclusions have to be made without having all of the information available. But I feel like the person writing this website has some very convincing arguments for what they put forward. Luckily for me, they have an article on the intro to Dark Souls 2 and things betwixt. In it, they propose the idea that this tree might be some kind of avatar of Queller, the god of dream. This god is referenced in several item descriptions, and its icon is, you guessed it, a giant tree. Now, I'm not going to expand too much on that, but isn't it quite a coincidence that if you take Queller's name and add two small letters at the beginning, you end up with another name? A name that might or might not also have a connection to trees. So this deity helps you to get to Drangleic, but what about things betwixt then? Well, it appears to be a space between spaces, somewhere outside of time, a gateway of sorts. This actually reminds me of Ash Lake and its multitude of arch trees, each supporting a different world. And I doubt it's a coincidence that this location utilizes the same kind of imagery, with giant pillars instead of trees stretching across the horizon. But that's quite enough of lore. Let's come back to our trees. These can actually be entered and contain the basic combat tutorials for the game. They also remind me of the Great Hollow in Dark Souls 1, as they contain several trees inside of them. Oddly enough, the internal trees this time around don't seem to grow from the original trunk, or even be the same type of trees. They actually seem to have grown from the ground that is present inside those trees. It's also quite interesting that we find basilisks in there, the exact same enemies we could see in the Great Hollow. Upon exiting things betwixt, you arrive in Majula. Majula is one of my favorite hub areas in any game ever. It looks amazing, the music is so peaceful, and you get to meet Bear Seek Lest.
Bear seek lest.
In terms of trees, aside from the ones all the way in the horizon, all of them are pretty dry. This is similar to what we could find in Firelink, and it makes me wonder why FromSoft would choose to put dead trees in their hub areas, despite them being a place of comfort and respite. Heading towards the Forest of Fallen Giants, that's when we start observing some more luscious trees. Nothing fancy, but I do like the little log bridge that the soldiers seem to have built to keep their feet dry. Ahead is a cave that you can enter, and it contains one ladder. What seems like the roots at the entrance are actually the branches of the tree in the middle of this low arena. I guess this is an extreme example of a weeping tree, with its branches going even lower than its own trunk. It looks really nice from this angle though, too bad there's no vantage point in the area. The next bonfire is one of my favorite locations in the game. It's quite simple, but the framing of the statue by the roots is really well made, and paired with the glow of the bonfire, it just feels very cozy. Actually, if you follow the roots upwards, you can see that they link to the tree that you can spot outside the building. Very nice touch. Right outside the bonfire is a giant root that you can walk on to get to the top of the fortified wall. I'm realizing, as I'm writing this, that it's quite common for FromSoft to use branches or roots as a way to add verticality to their levels, and I'm grateful for that. It fits the overall aesthetic of the game, makes sense lore-wise, and feels way better than having to climb ladders every 2 seconds. There are 3 more peculiar trees in the area, but they become even more interesting further into the game, so let's move on for now. Oh, and just a disclaimer, Dark Souls 2 has a bunch of areas that have no trees whatsoever, like Hyde's Tower of Flame, the Lost Bastille, or the Old Iron Keep. If I don't mention an area, you can safely assume that there are either no trees, or I didn't find much of value to talk about there. In Huntsman's Copse, however, there are a lot of trees, and some of them actually serve a gameplay purpose. The first one is this one, that you can kick to create a shortcut. I'll be the first one to admit that this shortcut is pretty useless, as it links 2 bonfires and you can directly teleport to one another. But I guess it might be a remnant of some older design with less bonfires. There's also another one of these shortcut trees in Things Betwixt, so it's not a one-off, and it once again shows that FromSoft doesn't shy away from using trees as a means of traversal through their levels. Another mechanic that is somewhat related to trees in Huntsman's Copse are these muffs that will rain poison down on you if you walk under them. I think the high number of trees in this area allowed them to place them in specific spots instead of them sticking to the edge of the playable area. And with the way they're positioned, they can actually be quite the nuisance while you're busy fighting other enemies. It's not often that something requires a ranged attack to deal with, but I feel like it was well used here, as you can still dodge them quite easily and they don't damage you directly, so if you pay attention to their location, they're not too much trouble. Speaking of useful trees, let's talk about the shaded woods. This area is covered in fog, and it has transparent enemies you can barely see that walk around and try to backstab you. They can be a pain to deal with, as you can't lock onto them and they tend to roll your attacks. Thankfully, the trees in the area are there to help you. Well, some of them, and only for a bit, and you need to hurt them. So you might have noticed that some trees here are bigger than others and they have faces on them. Well, it turns out, if you hit them, they moan. I guess that's one thing that trees and I have in common. But this isn't just for pleasure. Hitting them actually aggroes the phantoms and causes them to hit the tree instead of you. It doesn't last forever, but it does give you time to dispose of them. Once we progress a bit further into the game, we enter the Shrine of Amana. This area is quite the double-edged sword. On the one hand, it looks absolutely fantastic, but on the other hand, it is quite literally hell to get through. Now obviously, there are quite a lot of roots in this area. From the ceiling to the walls, most of it is full of roots. Somewhat similar to Lost Izalith in Dark Souls 1. I searched far and wide, and there doesn't seem to be a definitive answer as to which tree is the host of the roots found in the area. Maybe the shrine is another one of these transitional areas, like Things Betwixt. Maybe the roots belong to the tree from the opening cutscene. There are lots of theories online, but no conclusive evidence. My personal theory is that the shrine sits underneath the Bramble Blast level from Donkey Kong Country 2. I'm sorry, but the skybox is too similar. This cannot be a coincidence. I was gonna dismiss the dragon area as having no trees, but I still took the time to look around and I found something. It does have trees in the distance. These models are probably the least detailed ones in the entire game. They don't even have a trunk. I still think they're supposed to represent trees and not bushes, but yeah, not the prettiest ones. Before we move on to the DLCs, let's go back to our special forest trees. These are the corpses of giants. Giants in this game appear to be more tree-like than I initially suspected. When they die, they turn into this, and apparently slowly regenerate. The description of the seed of the Tree of Giants actually reads as such. When the giants fell, they grew into great trees. Death is not the end, or anything that has ever once lived remains a part of a great cycle of regeneration. But considering they've been chilling out there for a while, this regeneration seems pretty inefficient. I think it's quite cool that sentient beings in From Software games can turn into trees, and vice versa. It really cements trees as a crucial part of the lore and universe of these games. The Sunken City DLC doesn't really have many decorative trees per se, but it does have a lot of roots out and about. Similar to the Shrine of Amana, these seem to indicate how deep this area truly is. We can also spot these giant things, and I'm not really sure if they're roots or bones. They're so massive that if they are bones, I'm very worried about what kind of creature could be that size. It also has the most interesting tree in the entire game, and it's located in the most obscure place in the game. To get to it, you need to break this low row of statues on the side of the cliff, and then shoot the pillar with an arrow if needed. This will cause this huge pillar to rise up and let you into the cave. Walk a bit further in, and here it is. What a beauty. While this tree seems pretty useless at first, it is actually the most useful one in the entire game. It's another one of the freaky trees, probably a cousin of the ones in the shaded woods. It turns out that if you pick up the whip that you can find right next to him and whip him good, he will moan and repair your equipment. I know this might seem useless at first, especially when you can just repair your items at the Majula blacksmith, but it does have one specific use case. You see, Dark Souls 2 has a mechanic called soul memory, and that basically dictates who you can play multiplayer with based on the amount of souls that you've earned since you started playing the game. While this may seem like a great idea at first, it prevents people from jolly cooperation or invasion in early game areas for long periods of time. Let's say you want to help people beat the pursuer. You will eventually earn too many souls doing so, and your soul memory will be too high to match with the people in the area. Thankfully, they realized the flaw in the system and added a ring that you can equip that eats souls for you and keeps your soul memory from rising. Now the last problem is that if you inadvertently break your equipment, you can't repair it without earning souls. That was until the DLC was released and added the Freaky Tree. Thank you, Freaky Tree. As for the lore behind the existence of this tree, well, I searched far and wide and it seems that pretty much nothing is known about it. I do feel it might be inspired by Dante's Inferno, as it mentions people being transformed into thorny trees that are only permitted to speak when broken and bleeding. But even then, that might just be a stretch. Honestly, my best advice is just to not ask questions and whip away. The old Iron King DLC looks fantastic, but unfortunately, it seems that trees weren't really part of the equation this time around. Thankfully, the Ivory King DLC has a few things for us to look at. Elam Lois is full of trees. Some are fairly detailed, but others are more in line with the ones we could find in Dark Souls 1, with a 3D trunk and 2D planes to make the leaves. This is actually one of the areas with the most environmental details. Most of the city is fully modeled, and it even looks nice when you put the camera further away. But at the core of this city lies something much more somber, the Old Chaos. In case you're not up to date on your Souls lore, this place is made up of remnants of Lost Izalith and the Bed of Chaos. While the chosen undead does defeat the Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1, Chaos does not truly die. It lives on, even eons later, in this area of Dark Souls 2. The platform you fight on bears architectural resemblance to Lost Izalith. And more importantly, the thing we're here for, the giant roots that host this massive lava sinkhole. These are very similar to the ones surrounding the Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1, and they also extend upwards to form a larger trunk. It's usually harder to really take a look around as you fight the horde of enemies, but it's actually a really cool arena. Once more, we start with a tree and end with a tree. Let's see if Dark Souls 3 breaks the cycle. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.